Good morning. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. Thank you all for joining me today. Sorry for the members and the subscribers who were on earlier. I labeled the time for this episode. But we're here, 10 a.m. Eastern time on Mondays and Tuesday mornings. There's a good chance if I'm not here, if you log on and the show didn't start or whatever, there's a good chance it's just due to my technological incompetence. So it is what it is. But thank you all for being here this morning. There's a lot of people in the chat already. We got Bulgaria and Italy and Canada and Northeast U.S., Ohio. I think we got California, if I remember, on here today as well. So there's a lot of people in here already, and I appreciate your interest in the content that I produce and the science component of turfgrass, the turfgrass industry. So today we're going to go over a video, and tonight we're going to go over an article that actually uses the research was questioning whether or not they could actually use turfgrass as a means to alleviate a dairy problem, a phosphorus problem, basically. And we're going to find out tonight that indeed they do find that the proper use of turfgrass in sod production can be used to actually reduce our issues with dairy waste. So in the cow production and livestock production. So look forward to that tonight at 9 p.m. So I'm going to check the time, make sure I put the time on there right. But if you're new, it's Monday mornings for the members only at 10 a.m. and then Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. for a video commentary show. And then Tuesday night at 9 p.m. for a standard science article that we go over. Science. We've been going over phosphorus lately and soil testing lately. We're going to continue to do that tonight with phosphorus. On this episode, where we're doing a video commentary, it's not specific to phosphorus. It actually has to do with calcium, magnesium, which, if you remember, we went over, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks ago. We went over it for about a month. Basically, it's base cation saturation. And so we're going to get into it. It's a very short video, so if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and I'm pretty sure I'll have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions because I don't think it's going to take that long to get through this video. Let me get myself oriented here. So the video today comes from a channel called lunology, and the title of this says Soil Series 6, Calcium and Magnesium Benefits, What Lime to Use and Which Lime is Best. So I've watched a couple other ones on this channel, and I don't know how many they have. It's titled Soil Series 6. So I don't know if they have 8 or 9 or what he has in here, but I did watch a couple of them. And I really encourage everybody to watch those if you're able to critically think your way through it and you have a feeling for the literature and soil science and turf science, because it really is. I know this is going to sound derogatory, but it just is what it is. The content in the soil series that the lunology channel puts out is really a really good example of pseudoscience, salesmanship, Dunning-Kruger effect. They're really good at saying things in such a way that it sounds compelling. The manner in which he speaks sounds very convincing. So it can be very dangerous if you don't know the content and the science behind it. But it really is one of the better examples of just pseudoscience and salesmanship. This gentleman, or at least the content he says, is not based in any reality in science. So we're going to go over this particular one, Soil Series 6, but I'm going to go back and watch some of the other ones because I've only watched 1 or 2. And they're really a treasure trove of nonsense and BS. And so I'll use quite a bit of them for my commentary videos, assuming they're worth going over. But yeah, it's a lot of misinformation. I was just completely baffled that there's this much misinformation just on turfgrass science. Imagine all the other industries that, outside of our world that are on YouTube that, you just, how do you know what's true and what's not true? I mean, if there's this much just in turfgrass, good Lord. So we're going to get started here. And this gentleman's name is John Perry. And I don't know his background. I don't know where he comes from and sort of his history. So I may be wrong on this. But I believe John Perry owns and operates a manufacturer of some products for turfgrass. And I think it's listed under the, I can't remember the name of it, like some soil something or other. I can't remember the name of his company, but so he is a manufacturer of products, and he runs, I guess he runs this Lawncology channel. So he's sitting on a couch for those listening in a house. It looks like some windows in the background, and we're going to get started and see what he has to say about calcium and magnesium benefits.
Hey, continuing on, soil series. I have a very special shirt on today. Hide and seek, world champion, continues to be Bigfoot. I'm a big fan. Big fan of Bigfoot.
I don't know what that means. I will say this: if I was a less honorable person and I was selling a bunch of stuff, I'd want this guy as a salesman. I'll tell you that much. Because he has a really good yarn to spin. I mean, for sure, he does a very good job in the way in which he delivers it. So I can see how people would relate to him much better than they would relate to me. That's for sure.
Here we go. Recap. Covered nitrogen, covered phosphorus, CECs.
Yeah, see, I didn't know this, so I'll have to go back and watch his videos. I guess he has a video just on phosphorus and nitrogen and CEC, I guess. So look forward to those on a future Tuesday morning show, because I will definitely go back and watch those to see what he has to say about those elements.
OM. What on earth are we going to get into today? A lot of questions about calcium and magnesium. Now,
if you all, I have to go back and look. There was a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I had the diagnostic manual for BS disorder, and I had a list of issues or list of topics in the diagnostic manual, such as like if you have, if your salesman or if the person you're talking to mentions one of these items in the last 6 months. I copied it off of the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual for mental disorders. And they have like criteria. If you've done this, it's not a problem. But if you've done this, this, and this in the last 3 months, then it could be indicative of a mental abnormality. And so I use that sort of concept in the diagnostic manual for turfgrass BS disorders. And I don't remember if in there or not, if I included calcium and magnesium ratios or not. I have to go back and look. I can't remember. But if I didn't, that needs to go at a very high priority, and that needs to go high on the list, because when you're talking to somebody and you're not familiar with soil dynamics and soil calcium, magnesium issues and whatever, phosphorus, potassium issues in the soil, when they start pulling out the calcium, magnesium content, it can admittedly sound very compelling. It sounds very interesting. Calcium runs the show and everything goes in the plant on the back of calcium and all this other nonsense that they just say. But keep in mind, that is a very clear indication that you're dealing with a BS artist. If they start pulling out all these calcium, magnesium terminologies and balancing calcium, magnesium, and magnesium's influence in whatever they're talking about, the compaction and all, it's just all a bunch of hogwash. So keep that in mind for your, BS detection kit. Put that in the top of the list. It doesn't mean that they necessarily are BS. It doesn't even mean that they're wrong. They could be a BS artist. And they could be talking about calcium, magnesium, and they could be correct about what they're talking about. But it is an indication that this might be something I want to be aware of. What else does he have to say? Because they're starting off with some questionable content, to say the least. Oh, Gray Fox says, yeah, Greene County Fertilizer. Thank you, Gray. Yeah, so the Greene County is the product line or the company that he owns. And Gray Fox lists a number of their products that he sells. Okay, thank you, Gray. I appreciate that. No, and Connecticut, Cabana Consetta just before him. So Greene County. I'm sorry, Connecticut. I didn't see you as well. So thank you for bringing that to my attention.
There's been kind of a general perception or teaching that there are some ratios between cal and mag that should be honored, and that is somewhat true.
Not really. I'll be honest. It's not really that true. It's only true in the most bizarre and unusual circumstances. I'm talking with turfgrass. And Ignacio mentions here when he grew some tomatoes indoors, they thrived when I added calcium magnesium supplements. That may or may not be true, Ignacio. I'm not doubting what you saw, but what I'm saying is whether or not the calcium magnesium resulted in what you saw, I don't know. But remember, that's with tomatoes. I'm not a tomato specialist. I'm not a okra specialist or a pumpkin specialist. I have no idea what those plants require or do not require. When it comes to turfgrass, I can say with a great deal of confidence that calcium magnesium ratios are a distant thought, very, very far away from my interests. Because why? We've published evidence on that. We've looked at calcium magnesium in row crops in agriculture as well as turfgrass, and they can vary widely. It's the extractable quantity that would limit plant growth. So if you got below a certain extractable limit on calcium or any element, magnesium, whatever it is, that is which is what shows up on a normal soil test, a Malik 3 or an Olsen or whatever, Brave with phosphorus or whatever the case is. Those values are what we've correlated with turfgrass responses. Okay, so be mindful that when I'm speaking of this, I'm speaking specifically of turfgrass systems. I can't speak for every other plant. I have some elephant ears in my backyard. Some of them, I have giant elephant ears. One of them looks fantastic, not a problem on it at all. The other one looks awful, and I can't figure out why. It might be a nutrient deficiency. I have no idea why, because I'm not an elephant ear specialist. I don't know what it needs. So I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to look through the literature to see what could be causing what I'm seeing on that plant. But when it comes to turfgrass, I'm pretty confident that these calcium magnesium ratios are basically useless.
But nobody, I guess, really breaks that down because, sometimes it could say, well, you have 100 parts per million of mag, you have 500 parts per million of calcium. Are we in the go zone? No, maybe we need to go up on that.
No, you probably are in the go zone. If it's Malik 3, if you have 100 parts per million Malik 3 magnesium, just go worry about something else. What happens is we're kind of directed down the road of evidence and the road of truth. And inevitably, a salesman is going to come along and say, hey, look at these shiny little lights over here on this side of the highway. And you're going to kind of look over there on that side of the highway, and your car is going to naturally start to drift over to the right, whether you realize it or not. Or if you look to the left, without even knowing you're turning the car, you're going to start to kind of drift over to the left side of the road because you're looking that way. We need to stay focused on the goal, and the goal is to produce an acceptable plant for either a homeowner or golf course superintendent or owner, or whoever it is. And there's going to be distractions. Okay, a lot of people, they'll try to distract you off of the road because they have something that they want to sell. They see that money in your pocket and they're trying to get some out. Well, they can't get some out if you're going straight down the road. You need to kind of divert to their attention, divert in their direction. Okay, so if you have 100 parts per million magnesium, Malik 3 magnesium, go worry about something else. Don't worry about it. I don't care what the ratio is to calcium. Doesn't matter. Or any other element. Just go about your day. Focus on the pyramid of evidence that I've talked about before on my channel, where we talk about water, light, temperature, abiotic or biotic injury to the turf. Okay, go worry about one of those things. They're probably more influential than magnesium. If you're at 100 parts per million Malik 3 magnesium and 400 or 500 parts per million Malik 3 calcium, you kind of are floating down on the lower end, maybe. But I have a saw producer in Florida who has Malik 3 calcium at 150 parts per million calcium, 150. And I'm asking, well, does the turf look good? Well, it looks good. I mean, to me, that's low. I mean, to me, that's below my comfort zone. At 150 parts per million Malik 3 calcium is low. But he says, well, I don't want to have to chase my tail. I don't want to have to chase it when I'm trying to lift it up out of the sod farm, and I want to make sure it has enough in it. Okay, well, I'm with you. That's low. You're certainly warranted in considering the application of calcium at that level. So there are limits, but usually no one's near that low. That's the lowest I've ever seen calcium in a soil test in my life. I think it was 100 and I'll have to go back and look and pull it up. 120 or 30 parts per million omega-3 calcium. Extremely low. But the turf kind of looked okay. Okay? So go worry about something else. Try to stay on the road. Keep your attention directed forward. And yes, these people are going to come along. They're going to try to divert your attention. Occasionally, you need some azoxystrobin. Occasionally, you might need some, whatever it might be. You need a chemical for some use, or you might need some lime in some strange cases. Occasionally, you might need those. And so in those cases, utilize those services or those products that they're selling for your needs. Otherwise, don't get distracted. And it's very difficult. I understand. It's difficult when you have so many people trying to divert your attention away from your goal here, okay? But please keep in mind, when people are just saying this stuff, don't forget, it's just a tree octopus. They're just saying stuff because they're allowed to say whatever they want to say. It doesn't mean it's true, okay?
In a 5-to-1 ratio, could go to 6-to-1, 7-to-1. Calcium.
You can go up to 100-to-1, and that's in the Sartain paper. He's talking about calcium to magnesium. There were as low as 1-to-1, calcium, magnesium. I think they might have even been like 1-to-3 or 4. I mean, it might have been even more magnesium than calcium. I can't remember. I have to go back and look at that paper. But I know he went up to 100-to-1 calcium, magnesium without altering the pH, which is one of the faults of Albrecht. He came up with all these conclusions and didn't recognize that his treatments were altering the pH. But the turfgrass scientists who know what they're doing, they'll apply the calcium or they'll apply the magnesium to look at these ratios in a manner that does not alter the pH. And when we've done that, turfgrass looks perfectly fine from 1-to-1 calcium magnesium all the way to 100-to-1 calcium magnesium. So don't get confused or distracted by this nonsense.
Calcium is regulating an awful lot in this chain. In heavy clay soils, adding the cal to adjust pH and to move the scale.
Okay, well, hold on. Wait a second. So he's talking about adding calcium to adjust pH. I've said this before. Explain to me how calcium adjusts pH. Anybody want to throw something out at me? Okay. Calcium does not change the pH. Calcium provides a function in the pH adjustment mechanism, but it does not adjust pH. It's just that simple. I don't know how, on what universe we turned into a clown world, but that seems to be where we're at with a lot of this nonsense on YouTube. Calcium's function in the pH dynamic adjustments, or adjustment dynamics, is to remove hydrogen and aluminum or some of the other acidic cations that are on the exchange sites into soil solution. That's it. You saturate, essentially, you flood the soil solution in the soil exchange sites with calcium, which exchanges the hydrogen and aluminum that was on the exchange sites, and through mass action, the calcium goes onto the exchange sites, the hydrogen and aluminum come off the exchange site into soil solution, where they are now available to be neutralized with the carbonate that came with the calcium carbonate, the lime. Calcium doesn't change pH. It just doesn't work that way. But people who are ignorant and get on YouTube, like this gentleman, John Perry, get on and just start talking about it. It sounds very compelling. There's no scientists like me on YouTube talking about this. We don't get, the scientists in universities don't get paid to get on YouTube. Their tenure and promotion packets don't have. How many YouTube channel videos did you have? How many likes did you have on YouTube? They don't have that. So they're not on YouTube doing this stuff. Who is on YouTube is a mass amount of salesmen. And that's fine. Sell whatever you want. But when you're going to go down the roads of soil science and turfgrass science, you better be careful, because you probably don't know what you're talking about, which is clearly evident by what he's saying here. He thinks calcium adjusts pH. It does not. Show me something, anything, where calcium is the pH adjustment factor. It's not. It cannot be, because hydrogen and aluminum are the acidic cations, and calcium is a cation. They can't bind. You have to neutralize the hydrogen and aluminum out of soil solution, and in order to do that, you have to have an anion, like carbonate. Okay. Anyway, I just get so frustrated because there's so much nonsense like this on YouTube. It's just, for years, I really thought I was making a positive impact in the industry. And either when I was in the industry, I was still speaking this way in the industry, which is probably why I'm not in the industry anymore. Or when I was in academia, I really felt like, hey, I'm making a difference. I'm communicating this evidence, but I'm not. I wasn't. I really don't think I was. I might talk to 100 or 200 people at a meeting, and someone like this gets on YouTube and has, one video go out and it might get 500,000 views. Well, how many does this have? 10,000 views on this particular video. Some of the Turfgrass channels are huge. They'll get millions of views, which is great. No problem. Get millions of views. But the content in them, if it's science related, is not normally correct. That's the problem. And then we sit back as scientists and think that we're having an impact because we're going to a turf conference and we're speaking at the Sports Field Managers Association or the Golf Course Superintendent Association. We're talking, that's good, keep doing that. But we're losing the battle because there's so many charlatans out there preaching the exact opposite of what we're talking about. Talking about base count saturation, talking about calcium, magnesium, talking about applying lime to reduce pH. There's a great video that I will definitely go over. It's very long. It's like an hour long. But there's a great video that was recorded a couple of weeks ago. And it is just a wonderful, wonderful video that shows the Barnum effect, which I haven't gone into in this channel yet. It shows cold reading, which I have not gone into in this channel yet. And I will do I'll use that video as a means to explain and describe what is cold reading and what is the Barnum effect. And it has to do with just people talking about calcium, magnesium, base count saturation. It never ends. Okay? So anyway, we'll get back to the episode. But please stay focused on the goal. Keep your eyes directed forward on the road of truth.
A little bit allows for a highway and some space in the soil for your other nutrients to flow through.
What he's talking about is calcium and the nonsense, the horrible argument about applying calcium to help aggregate the soil and create channels of flow and all this stuff. And clearly, calcium provides a role in that. There's no doubt. I'm not saying it doesn't. But he's talking about a soil that is compacted. He's at least implying that a soil was compacted, and the calcium added would create a channel from which nutrients and so forth would flow through. And that's just inaccurate. It doesn't work that way. I should say it doesn't work that way in normal soils. If you're in a sodic soil and you have clearly a sodic soil and a chemical compaction as a result of sodic soils, then and only then would calcium be of value to you. Okay.
So you're creating a buffer zone. Now, for many people who sent in soil samples to me, I gave a lot of calcium recommendations.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. That's what a lot of pseudoscientists and BS salesmen do. Oh, we don't make any money on calcium. We're doing don't worry, because what I'll say is that's complete nonsense. You don't need to do that. And he'll go, well, not him, but other salesmen will say, well, what do you mean? We don't make any money on calcium. I'm just helping these people out because I don't make any money on calcium. That's true. They probably don't make any money on calcium, but they sure heck make 60, 70, 80 points on all that liquid junk that they sell, liquid humics and liquid sea kelps and liquid aeration and all this other stuff. So to get them in the door, it's like crack. It's like heroin. Give them a little bit for free, and that opens the gate, and then you got them caught. You got them in the system. It's literally the same thing. Okay, so don't be fooled.
Magnesium recommendations, some sulfur recommendations. I also gave the tips on which products.
How did he give sulfur recommendations? There's exactly 0 publications on turfgrass sulfur levels. 0 in the literature. None. So how did he give a sulfur recommendation when there's none? There's no evidence to support a sulfur recommendation as of yet, except for what exists on my computer that I haven't published yet. Okay. None. In row crops, yes. Corn, absolutely. Soybeans, yes. Probably some in alfalfa as well. But in turfgrass, not yet. It's not as far as I know. But he's giving recommendations on it.
From Greene County, and the next line to use to continue the health and to grow the the carbon aspect and the organic matter and all of that. So that was what I was answering a lot of questions on those soil tests. So here we are in this.
Maybe someone can explain to me why this would be the case. I think I know the reason. I'm going to give you my reason, but you tell me if it makes sense. Why would someone go to a gentleman like John Perry for soil testing recommendations? What are you going to gain from that? He clearly is soil and turfgrass illiterate. He does not understand soil testing recommendations, the chemistry behind it, the correlations and calibrations that are required to generate these recommendations. He clearly does not understand that. So why would you go to him for recommendations? My argument is, I don't think the average person even realizes that these universities have turfgrass departments. Or turfgrass programs. I don't think they even know that, much less that the turfgrass and soil faculty at those universities have evidence-based ranges, and they do research on this. I don't think the average person even recognizes that. And so they see something on YouTube, and they go, oh, well, I'll send something to him. He knows. Because they don't even recognize every state has a land-grant institution that they can go to for valid evidence-based information. That's what I think. I could be wrong. But I just think the average, we overestimate our influence in academia. We overestimate our reach. I don't think the average person has any clue that they probably don't even have a clue that land-grant institutions exist. If they do, they probably don't have a clue that turfgrass programs exist. And if they do, they probably don't realize that soil testing research exists in those programs. But when you're on YouTube, like I said, that's a great deal of exposure. And that's not where academicians spend their time. So that's my argument. But I don't know if it makes sense or not. You guys tell me.
Mag section. I want to kind of run through this a little bit. Now, granular fertilizers, specifically mixed, items with like a 1010, 1604, whatever it is. There is not traditionally 100% of that bag would be usable material. There's quite a bit of filler that goes into those bags. And
yeah, that's definitely true. So that's one thing about this video that is true, is that having blended fertilizer for, I don't know how many years, 6-7 years, and having worked in the fertilizer industry for a long time, there is a great deal of waste in granular fertilizer. The area for improvement is elimination of filler. And if you want to know more about that, I do have 1 or 2 episodes on blending on this channel. Go back and look at the playlist. I think they're entitled Advanced Fertilizer Formulations for Turf, or Fertilizer Formulations for Turf. And I walk through that and explain in detail how to minimize filler, what sort of filler options would be agronomically superior to limestone or to sand. And I'll kind of walk through why you would want to consider doing that. So he's right about that. There's a lot of filler if it's not blended correctly.
And that would be with some form of calcium carbonate or something like that to fill the space to give you a full 50 pounds.
Yeah, that's true. Generally, it is calcium carbonate. But basically, think of it like this. They can use any product they want that just takes up space in the bag, okay, and has weight. So generally, blenders will find the least expensive source of filler, and it's usually a locally sourced limestone. But it can be anything. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it doesn't have a nutrient in it that they're going to label and it takes up space. It can be anything, but almost always it's limestone because it's inexpensive and it can be locally sourced to wherever the blending plant is.
So when they're sort of muting those other numbers to get things in there, that's what they use to create space, is this calcium product. So does that really do much for the soil or even contribute to the calcium load? Maybe a little. Not necessarily for the soil, but it could change pHs. You could see some rising because of that. You could see higher cal levels, and that could eventually tie things up if magnesium isn't kind of coming along with it. Now,
okay, all right. Well, okay. Let me back up. What he's talking about is the inclusion of limestone as a filler. Would it have some sort of deleterious effect or unintended consequence when you're applying it as a granular fertilizer? And the answer is probably yes. He's right about that. We don't really know. The limestone that they're including is not like ag-grade limestone. It's not the same limestone you'd buy in a bag and put it out on your lawn. Because it hasn't been granulated, it's more like rocky. It's just raw material that's been mined and sieved, okay? And it can be very dusty. So I would not count on that limestone as a filler to be a neutralizing agent to soil pH. However, it's certainly not going to lower the pH It's probably, if it has any effect at all, it's probably going to have a slight liming effect after you apply it. Okay, but then he said if it's not coming along with magnesium, I'm not sure what he's talking about. He's basically saying that you could have an effect if it's not coming along with magnesium. It doesn't matter if it's coming with magnesium or not. The lime as calcium carbonate as filler is going to have some effect, more than likely, or if it does have an effect on the soil pH. It's not going to be altered by the inclusion of magnesium, unless it's magnesium carbonate, which would further increase pH. But magnesium is almost never included, unless it's dolomite, unless it's magnesium sulfate. Okay, so magnesium sulfate's not really going to have an effect on pH because there's no carbonate to bind the hydrogen and the aluminum. Okay.
Magnesium itself is going to adjust pH the most.
No, it's not. Show me, John. Show me in the literature where you applied magnesium as magnesium, just magnesium, say magnesium sulfate, for example. How about that? Or magnesium chloride, for example. Just that. And you had a influence on pH. Because if you can show me that, I'll show you 10 that they applied it and it didn't influence pH. It can't. It cannot. It's the same thing as calcium. Magnesium and calcium are different elements, obviously. They're different size elements. But when you're applying magnesium, especially if you're going to apply it like lime, where you're going to apply a lot of magnesium to flood off, the hydrogen and aluminum, that's what purpose it would serve. It would exchange the hydrogen and aluminum on the soil exchange sites and move it into solution. Now you have hydrogen and aluminum solution. Now what's going to happen? The soil solution pH is going to skyrocket unless you have something in there to neutralize it. So magnesium is not going to have an effect. It's the other ion. If it's magnesium carbonate, for example, or magnesium oxide, which I would not apply if I were you all, I wouldn't do that. But it has to be the other element that is there present, and it can't be sulfate. Sulfate's a neutral salt, or sulfate doesn't have an influence on pH. So magnesium sulfate is a neutral salt. Calcium sulfate is a neutral salt. Okay, that's why gypsum doesn't have an effect on pH. Calcium's on gypsum, doesn't have an effect on pH. So calcium and magnesium have a function in the pH neutralization dynamic, but they will not, calcium and magnesium, they will not increase soil pH. It has to be the other ion that's there with it. So this is what I'm saying. This is an example. He just doesn't know what he's talking about. He's probably read it. He's probably read a book that's been in like a base kind of saturation book, and it sounds convincing to him, so he just regurgitates the same nonsense.
Whenever you add mag, that is sending things way higher than calcium will, but the two of them working together tend to regulate an awful lot of things, and that would be your water and air and nutrient movement down into the soil, especially in tightly bound soils like clay.
Okay, so that's the reason what I was saying is that he's talking about flocculation and dispersion of clays as a result of calcium or magnesium. That can occur, but again, almost always in sodic soils. It almost never occurs in any other soil other than a sodic soil. And it has nothing to do with the calcium-magnesium ratio, except for, like I said, the most extreme, bizarre cases. So we're talking like less than 1% of the population would have, the soil population is what I mean, would have some sort of chemical or physical dynamic in it that a calcium-magnesium ratio would be a concern to you. But when you get down the rabbit hole, when you're Alice and you're going down that rabbit hole, it's hard to recondition yourself back into reality. So he's down the rabbit hole. Let's see how far he goes.
Flipping over into the sand areas. Now, in Florida, we have an awful lot of phosphorus in the soil. We have an awful lot of calcium in the soil, and not as much magnesium. So magnesium does get used a lot down there in lawn care programs. There's a lot of micronutrients being put down with magnesium at the front and center. The problem with that is because it raises pH so much, the soil pH down there is so high already, it's tying up all of these other elements, and companies and homeowners are pounding lawns with iron to try to get color out of them just to fix that, because the pH is so high it doesn't really have anything else to pull from, so they're having to get this foliar iron.
Yeah, all that's complete nonsense. It's just not true at all. Most soils in Florida are slightly acidic. which is, I went over that a couple of weeks ago on one of the incidental papers. I kind of showed some graphs. People have this idea that Florida soils are basic or calcareous. It's generally not true. Of course, you're going to have pockets here and there that are going to be above 7. But most soils in Florida are below 7. That's the reason they switched to Mehlich 3. Okay. The extract at University of Florida is Mehlich 3. It used to be Mehlich 1. So what he's saying is not true. Don't believe it. And on top of that, I'm exploring options to find copious amounts of data on soil testing in Florida to map and to graph the various soil pHs by county level in Florida. I'm hoping I can get a hold of those data at some point in the next year or two. And I'll show you. Most of it's going to be slightly acidic. It's just the way it is. So he just says stuff. Now, when he says Florida soils are high in phosphorus, that's generally true. We mine phosphorus. And he said we have it. So maybe he's in Florida. I don't know where he's at. Phosphorus is high in Florida. It's very, very difficult to ever see a phosphorus deficiency in turfgrass in Florida. I'm not sure if it's ever actually been documented. I know we've done some phosphorus work, and it's not easy to get phosphorus levels in the soil low enough to actually see a deficiency. It's very, very difficult in Florida because you have to just do some crazy, crazy stuff. And even after that, it takes years and years and years to leach all that phosphorus through and to harvest it off to get it to the point where you'd see a phosphorus deficiency in the turfgrass. Very, very difficult. So there's no reason to apply much phosphorus at all in Florida at all. And so, he's talking about the pH is so high, so that's the reason you have to apply iron. No, it's not. Okay, go back and look at the iron episodes. Iron deficiencies are going to occur even in acidic soils. You say, well, the pH goes up, it's going to bind more iron. Yeah, okay, it will. But the iron's still bound at low pHs as well. You're still going to see iron deficiencies in the spring on turf grasses, whether it's basic or whether it's acidic. You're still going to see that. And applying an iron fertilizer to the soil, if it's pH 7 or pH 6 or pH 8 or pH 5, it's probably not going to have an effect anyway because the iron oxidizes within minutes of application. Minutes, not hours. So the idea that you can, the soil pH is so high, that's the reason why we have to apply a lot of iron out there, spraying out iron or spreading out iron or whatever, is not really based in reality. Iron is going to oxidize very quickly. It's affected by pH for sure, but in a pragmatic sense, there's really not going to be much available at all in the soil solution. Okay, so we spray out iron for the color, and so don't believe this. Oh, Gray says that he's in Idaho and claims to do big business in Florida. Well, he probably does big business in Florida. They spill more fertilizer in Florida than probably the entire Northeast United States even applies. We're talking thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tons. I mean, it's crazy the amount of fertilizer that goes out in Florida. And it's not because it's not an environmental issue. Why? Because they're not doing one turn every 18 months in Florida. Some crops, they're trying to do 3 turns a year. Sod production, they're trying to do 1 turn every 9 to 10 months. Okay. So when you do it on the production ratio, like how much fertilizer is required to produce this much, it's not out of the ordinary at all compared to other locations in the United States. It's just because the environment down there is hot and wet and sunny all the time, so you can grow crops so much faster down there. So on that note, lawns, especially south of I-4 or south of Orlando, are going to grow 365 days a year. So they require more nutrients. They require more fertilizer, right? So yeah, I wouldn't doubt it if he does a heck of a lot of work down in Florida. If I was selling fertilizer, that's the first place I'd stop is in Florida.
Now, in that scenario, if I've got this, either say magnesium is high and calcium is high, both of them, we're going to go in there with sulfur and with sulfated materials and start to work that soil to lower the pH and the fast.
What? Hold on. Let me back this up. What he said was so ignorant. I want to make sure that I'm hearing it correctly.
That scenario, if I've got
hang on, let me back up.
Companies and homeowners are pounding lawns with iron to try to get color out of them just to fix that, because the pH is so high it doesn't really have anything else to pull from, so they're having to get this foliar iron. Now, in that scenario, if I've got this, either say magnesium is high and calcium is high, both
Okay, magnesium's high and calcium's high. Okay.
both of them, we're going to go in there with sulfur and with sulfated materials and start to work that soil to lower the pH. And
He's talking about, okay, he said sulfur and sulfated materials. He's talking about sulfur or sulfate?
And start to work that soil to lower the pH. Both of them, we're going to go in there with sulfur and with sulfated materials and start to work that soil to lower the pH. And the fastest way to do that is by getting more organic acids in there. And
So he's talking about two different things there. He said sulfur and sulfated materials. One of those will reduce pH and one of them will not. So sulfur will, sulfate will not. I don't care how much sulfate you throw out there. It's not going to have an effect on lowering soil pH. Unless you're in a sodic soil. I guess there's a case in a sodic soil that could do that. But sulfate doesn't do anything to the soil pH. Sulfur, through the oxidation process of sulfur, that when that sulfur is oxidized, when it is oxidized into sulfate, that process releases hydrogen ions, and that's how come the soil pH will drop. But sulfate will not do anything. And that's what he said. He said sulfur and sulfate. So maybe he just misspoke and said sulfur and sulfate, and he meant to just say sulfur. I don't know. It's not real clear on what he's saying. But please don't put out any sulfate form thinking that you're going to have an effect on soil pH, because you're not. Okay. Ammonium sulfate, it reduces pH, but it has nothing to do with the sulfate. Calcium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, iron sulfate will reduce pH, but it has nothing to do with the sulfate. Okay, sulfate has already performed its function of oxidation. It's already oxidized, SO4. It's sulfate. It has all four oxygens on it, S2O4. So it's not going to do anything to the pH.
Again, is going to come from, what do I always talk about? Roots. I talk about roots. I talk about growing that organic matter and feeding the soil from underneath.
Remember, now feeding the soil is for sure on the diagnostic manual for turfgrass BS disorder. So he's already used calcium, magnesium, and now he's talking about feeding the soil. So those two are, I don't know if calcium, magnesium is on there. I'll add it if it's not. But feeding the soil is for sure on the criteria for turfgrass BS disorder. Whenever someone wants to talk about feeding the soil, that's definitely an indication that you could be dealing with a BS artist.
So in other cases where you might have high pH, low calcium, or high magnesium.
High pH, low calcium, or high magnesium.
And high pH, we're going to go in.
So high pH, low calcium, or high pH, high magnesium. Okay, I'm with you.
In there with probably gypsum to adjust that because of the sulfur.
Oh my God! See, that's what he's saying. He's saying the sulfur from gypsum, sulfate. Let me finish this and see what he says.
And that's going to help bring the cal into the soil and the sulfur into the soil and help to buffer that pH in a downward fashion and feed the calcium in to continue all of those other elements riding into the plant. And
yeah, he's completely ignorant. He doesn't know what he's talking about with soil science. I'm sorry, John, but you don't. It's just the way it is. You're applying gypsum for the sulfate to adjust pH is just wrong. That doesn't happen. You say this with such confidence, which is quite impressive, to say the least. But no, so low calcium, high pH, or high magnesium, high pH, you're going to go in with gypsum to adjust the pH downward. Gypsum is not going to reduce the soil pH unless you're in a sodic soil, which in that case you're dealing with like 8.5 pHs or 9 pHs. In those cases, then it can help. But I'm assuming 99% of us are like the other 99% of soils, and there's no sodic people on the chat today or listening to this. Okay, sodic soils exist, but they are a very, very small minority of turfgrass soils. So if you're dealing with sodic soils, I'll give you that. But for the other 99% of us, Gypsum is not going to have an effect on pH, and that's what he just said. I'll rewind it. I can't believe this.
We're going to go in there with
Okay.
high pH, low calcium, or high magnesium and high pH. We're going to go in there with probably gypsum to adjust that because of the sulfur.
So that's what he's saying. I can't believe it. That's what he's saying. He's saying that sulfur from gypsum is going to reduce pH. It's a tree octopus, I'm telling you. That's all it is. You can make the most creative website and creative turfgrass product, the best marketing, the fanciest label, and it makes not a lick of difference as to whether or not the product in that bottle actually performs a valuable service in turfgrass science. It makes no difference. It could be a bottle of complete BS or a bottle of very valuable information. And this is an example of that. He's just saying stuff. It's not true, but the average homeowner would never know this, never know this. They would probably go, oh, well, gypsum has sulfur in it, so it must reduce pH because I've heard sulfur reduces pH. Sulfur does reduce pH. Sulfate does not.
And that's going to help bring the cal into the soil and the sulfur into the soil and help to buffer that pH in a downward fashion and feed the calcium in to continue all of those other
unbelievable
elements riding into the plant. And Kinsey says calcium is sort of the mule that all of the nutrients ride on its back to make.
I don't know who Kinsey is. He must be an author of some nonsensical soil book or something. I don't know. And I don't even know why everybody's so worried and concerned about calcium in the soil. Calcium's everywhere. It's everywhere. In any normal arable soil, calcium is the dominant ion, cation. It's everywhere. Stop worrying about it. Don't worry about it. Go do something else. Seriously. Just go worry about your irrigation pump or your main line, making sure it's fixed or whatever. Worry about water first. Worry about temperature and light. We're at the end of September. The trees, the disease trees anyway, in my location here in Lexington, Kentucky, the disease trees are losing their leaves right now. You can tell all the disease trees in Lexington because they're the first ones that lose their leaves in the fall. And all the healthy trees keep their leaves on for another 2 or 3 weeks. It's a light and a temperature thing that's going on. Now, we've been very warm here the last couple of weeks here in Lexington, but the light is still going down. The sun is still declining. It's September 24th right now. And you can walk, as we go on a walk every evening with my wife, you can see all the leaves and you look at that tree and you can see it's diseased. That's a light issue. And then the temperature issue is going to come. The seasons are changing. The turf grass is changing right now. It's changing. Cool season grasses are beginning to grow more. Warm season grasses are beginning to physiologically change. And they may not be slowing down yet, depending on where you're at, but they're going to start slowing down here very, very soon. Worry about that stuff. Be aware about that stuff. Be aware of how that would alter your management practices. Don't worry about this nonsensical stuff with calcium. Okay, it's a sign of a BS disorder, BS artist.
Make it down into the plant. I think that's a pretty good analogy. It's doing a lot of work to help funnel things down into the plant. Now, is it doing most of the work? It all has to work together. No, but if there's a shortage there, then we have to fix it. That's the big deal. If there's a shortage, then we have to fix it. If there's an imbalance, we have to fix it.
No. He was doing good. If there's a shortage, we do have to fix it. You were doing so good, John. You were doing so good. If there's an imbalance, we have to fix it. Whoa, hold on. Imbalance should go in there as well as a keyword indicator of a BS artist. Imbalance. You got to keep those calcium, magnesium, and potassium balanced in the soil. In other words, you got to keep that money coming in. You got to keep that money coming into my company. That's what these base kind of saturation BS artists have to say. They have to say that. They have to continue to preach that. They're already so far down the rabbit hole. If they were actually to acknowledge that they were wrong, come back out, they're probably fearful they'd lose a bunch of money. But you're right. If there's a shortage, you need to fix it. That's right. You're right about that. Just stick with that. Okay, there's plenty of shortages here and there that would be more than adequate to supply enough product in your cells to be perfectly fine. You don't have to go down the balancing category, but about the balancing method. It's just nonsense.
If I look at something and see there's an excessively high magnesium rate, we're going to want to feed it calcium. In those CEC numbers I talked about, those 100% saturations, we're going to want to feed the calcium, and that'll actually shrink the magnesium.
See, here we go. Here we go. This is what I'm talking about. This is the racket I talked about the other day with the guys from Acres TV. Well, if the calcium's too high, you got to apply some more magnesium and bring that calcium down. If the magnesium's too high, we got to apply some calcium because there's only 100% on the exchange sites. He's going down the same roads.
Or if they're both really high, we're going to bring the sulfur in there. We're going to want to see that shrink, and so maybe some potassium sulfate. We're going to create those elements in building that robust soil system. Now, this may seem over the top.
It's just nonsense. If you want to call BS over the top, then yes, it's over the top, John. It's over the top. Okay. You have to understand you're on a seesaw. If you're on base kind of saturation, you're on a seesaw. And no matter what you do, you're constantly having to keep the seesaw exactly balanced. Well, if your friend gets on and gets a little more weighted, then you got to put somebody else on the other side. And you keep adding more people on each side until the whole thing is so piled full of nonsense. You got 15 people on the seesaw. You don't have to worry about that. You have enough or you don't have enough. That's it. It's that simple. Any of the normal extractable soil tests, Malix, Olson, Bray, modified, it doesn't, any of the normal extractable soil tests have correlations and calibrations for these. And all you have to do is know what the limits are on those tests. Okay, I've gone over the Malic 3 limits. I haven't gone over Malic 1s or the other ones. I think I may have went over Olson. I can't remember. That's all you got to worry about. Just if you're above those limits, go worry about something else. Don't worry about constantly keeping the thing balanced back and forth. That is the racket, because no matter what the soil test says, you can always sell them something extra to rebalance it back out. That's the racket. It really is. And in the sufficiency level, we say you either have enough or you don't. Well, if you have enough, the salesman doesn't have any hook to sell you something. They have to figure out some other hook. That's how the base count and saturation stuff continues to go. That's how the saturated paste extracts continue to convince people to spend money with these people. It's pathetic.
For just somebody who's out there doing yard work, that doesn't really want to have to think about all this stuff. Like, this is just too much for me to consider. But that's fine. You don't have to do that.
It is too much to consider. And in fact, I'm doing some work with base count and saturation right now on some turfgrass soil testing studies. And it's a pain in the freaking neck. Okay, it is a royal pain in the ass, to be honest, because every time I do an application, I have to know what the balance is and whether or not it's within balance of calcium and magnesium, potassium. And so I'm basically disregarding any critical limit, and I'm looking at the balance. Okay, and so every time, every plot is different than the next, and then from one plot and the same plot, the next application that is different than the next. So I'm constantly having to fidget with these treatments every time to figure out what the appropriate treatment should be to align with the base cation saturation philosophy. It is a nightmare. Okay. So it is a lot to keep up with. I agree. So we agree on two things in this video.
But what you should be doing is looking at what you put down on your lawn anyway. It's not just to set it and forget it. That doesn't work with sprinkler systems. It doesn't work with fertility. You can't do it that way.
I've been doing it that way for 20 years. I apply a little bit of nitrogen. It depends on how much I want to mow it, but I'll apply a little bit of nitrogen during the appropriate time of the year. And that's it. I don't do anything. Oh, I do apply some pre-emergent herbicides. I mean, herbicides, I do take care of some of the weeds. But that's it. I'll take a picture of my lawn when I get done, guys. I'll post it on the members only community tab this afternoon. I'll just find some way to timestamp it. I'll walk right out there and take a picture of my lawn, and it's fine. I've been doing it for years, just a little bit in. That's it. You don't need all this junk. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. I get it. Not everybody has the same lawn. I get it. But I had it in Florida the same way, had it in Oklahoma the same way, had it in Fort Lauderdale the same way. It's not this complicated. It doesn't need to be this complicated. Apply a little bit of nitrogen. If you do happen to have some things that happen to change the quality of the turf, we can diagnose that very quickly and alleviate that. It's not difficult, and it doesn't take a long time, okay? So
you really need to examine what is going out, and you vary your program. So
I don't. I'll just be honest. I actually put out the first slow release material I've ever put on my lawn just like a couple weeks ago. I think I posted on the members only community tab. And the only reason I did it was because I had a 5-gallon bucket of some research material that I just wanted to get rid of. That's it. Otherwise, I would never do that. It's very simple. You don't have to make it complicated.
just think this, always very varied. So
I never varied. I do the same thing every day. For those of you who don't know, I'm neurologically diverse. Okay, I'm neurodiverse. I eat the same thing every day. I dress almost the same way every day. I fertilize my lawn the same way every year. I almost never change from my routine. I basically brush my teeth the same number of strokes. Don't even get me started. It doesn't change, okay? I've mowed my lawn with reel mowers. I've mowed them with robot mowers. I've mowed them with push mowers. It's all the same. The nutrients applied is almost always, it's 95% nitrogen, only in rare cases where I'm like, well, something might be a little off, where I would consider doing something else. In your case, you may have a very unusual situation. I get that. You may be in one of those rare situations where phosphorus is limited. There's areas of Alabama and Georgia that the phosphorus is very low, and it may be altering the turf grass quality. I get that. Okay. So you may be one of those people. But it's not complicated. Just add a little phosphorus and you're good to go. Don't go down these roads of distraction. Remember, this is the distraction process. You're staying focused. Even if you're staying focused, it doesn't mean you're staying focused only on N. If you're in a situation where you're phosphorus deficient, stay focused on N and phosphorus. Just stay focused on that. And then here comes the diversion with humic acids or calcium, magnesium, or whatever. Okay? Stay focused on what you need and don't get distracted by all this other nonsensical pseudoscience.
You set things up to where I'm going to go ahead and put nitrogen down this and some potassium. Now I'm going to move over here into these micronutrients. I'm going to do this. And you can do that just with off-the-rack material. You don't have to be a customer of mine by any means. This is general information for everybody. And pros out there, it's the same thing. If you stick to one item for too long, everything else will suffer. Now,
not in my case. How long does it take, John? Or too long? What's your definition of too long? Because I've been doing it for 20 years. And my lawn looks fine. The daily DIY dude asks, I'd love to see my lawn. All this sounds believable. I just need to see your turf. Do you have a video on your personal lawn? I have photos of my lawn on the members only community tab. And I've posted photos of my lawn on Twitter for however long I've been doing, 10, 15 years. You have to go back and look at it. You know, I mowed it with a reel mower at 1 inch in Florida, on 419 Bermuda, and it striped that sucker up just as good as any approach or fairway would in a golf course. And I mowed it with robot mowers, and it's just in. It's not difficult. But again, I just want to emphasize that you may be in a situation where you can't just apply N. I get that, but it's not N and P and K and iron and magnesium and manganese and sulfur and zinc and boron and all this other stuff. Okay, that's where people can get deceived and distracted off of the path.
One of the reasons that nitrogen was always kicked in as one of the most, let's put that out there, is because in agriculture, in nature, that was the element that was in short supply, so it was fed the most. Okay, well, now we've done that. So we got to go back to the other stuff and get back to the nurture. Okay. Nurture the nature and let it just grow. So
okay, well, just show me anything. Show me anything where nitrogen, something more than nitrogen is required, which is fine. I've gone over plenty of papers that have shown that, where a little bit of phosphorus might be required, a little bit of potassium might be required here and there. And I'll show you an equal number of papers that shows the application of those elements cause harm to your turf. The potassium can harm turf just as much as, if not more, than help your turf. Okay? So you put out potassium because this guy says it, and then you have a disease outbreak. Now you're spraying out fungicides because you have a disease outbreak. And you have a disease outbreak because you applied the potassium. That's a racket. That's what it is.
Looking at those base saturations, looking at your CECs, figuring out where those calcium, magnesium levels are and where they are in relation to each other. You can have cal levels between 40 and say 80% depending on soil type and saturation, and 5 to 15%. I've seen higher on mag, but then we're getting out. I don't really want those two totals to equal more than 80% of your saturation.
So you please go back in the channel and look. I think I went over base saturation for a month. I don't remember. And nowhere in any of those papers was there even a shred of evidence to support this assertion. Go back and read it. Don't believe me. I've said on my channel multiple times, don't believe me. Read the literature. Base your management practices off of the literature. Because I could misspeak on this channel. I have misspoken on this channel. I can make mistakes. Okay, the literature can make mistakes too, but the chances are much lower if you follow the literature that you would make mistakes than if you followed what I say. Okay?
In, say, sandy soils, even in clay, but we might have a higher balance of one than the other. We might want more magnesium in the clay and less calcium. We're going to get those base saturations to kind of come into play. So that's where the recommendations come from me.
Yeah, so he's completely indoctrinated and delusional at this point. And this was, 5 years ago, so I don't know if he still has the same opinion or not. I don't know if he's come back to reality or not, but the video is still on YouTube, so I'm assuming he still holds this position, which I could be wrong. But this idea of calcium, magnesium, you want them below 80% or don't want them more than 80%, it's all just a tree octopus. That's all it is.
To balance that system first, and then the fertilizer you apply, whatever it may be, the soil amendments you apply, have a wonderful pathway to travel down and make it into the plant. Okay?
I think he's talking about nutrient use efficiency. I assume that's what he's saying. They balance the soil correctly, and then you'll have greater nutrient use efficiency. All of that has been looked at in turfgrass systems, ag systems. Zero evidence to support it. None. So feel free to search the literature. Send me something. If it comes from Dr. Albrecht, remember, almost all of his literature is tainted and erroneous because he states that soil pH does not influence plants as much as the calcium saturation. So his viewpoint, his conclusions were flawed from the beginning. So if you send me something, please do, that shows any evidence to support the use of base calcium saturation, please do. I encourage everybody to do that. And I will review it, and I will post it on this channel. I'll be happy to do that, okay? Until then, there's not a shred of evidence to support any of this nonsense.
So that's that piece that you guys have asked about. I'm going to leave this one right there. 2 reasons. My battery is dying.
Okay, so I guess he's done. Okay, so I guess that's it on the video. He's got a minute left, so I guess he's just going to wrap things up and do whatever he was doing. So that's it on the Soil Series 6 calcium magnesium benefits. It's delusional, base calcium saturation, and just a whole bunch of BS and nonsense. Please protect yourself. Put your money in your wallet, put your wallet in your pocket, and then put your hand over that wallet when you're talking to these people. Okay? Because, I don't know where it goes, but you protect it. Okay? Protect that money. Because there's really no difference between these people and Joseph Smith or Uli Geller or, any of the charlatans and fraudsters and hucksters and stuff that existed in religion or in any other, magic or whatever. P.T. Barnum. I mean, there's all sorts of, examples of this that exist, and it exists in turfgrass science as well. Okay, let me go through the chat and see if there's any questions that you have for me. Ignacio says, great to listen to your content. Thank you. Don't stop. Fact over opinions. It's refreshing. Thank you, Ignacio. To Till Turf says, good morning from Virginia. Good morning to you. I'm not sure if I remember someone coming from Virginia, so thank you for being here, To Till Turf. And let's see, Gardener Earth. Yeah, so Gardner says cow magnesium works great for blossom rot, but turf doesn't flower. Yeah, so it's just a difference in the two plant systems. I mean, I'm not saying calcium magnesium wouldn't be useful for some other plant. I don't know the other plants. So it could be useful in those situations. Yeah, so Garden Earth Guy says years ago in the early 90s, we were taught that calcium buffered acidic soils. I mean, I'm not going to say that a calcium saturated soil would not have a greater buffer capacity than a soil that was not calcium saturated. What I'm saying is the inclusion of calcium with the intent of altering pH is not going to happen unless the counter ion that came with the calcium is capable of neutralizing the acidic cation, such as hydrogen and aluminum. And those would come from things like calcium carbonate, it's the carbonate, or calcium oxide, which don't do calcium oxide. You're going to screw things up, but the oxide would do that as well in that form. Or magnesium carbonate would do it as well. There's other neutralizing compounds, but it's not the calcium that neutralizes it. But the calcium that's in the soil, as well as other components that are in the soil, may in fact buffer the soil to pH changes. That's true. Randy says, oh, the counterion or nitrate, such as calcium nitrate. I don't know if calcium nitrate is a neutral salt or not. I'm not sure. I assume it would be. But I can't speak to that one, Randy, whether or not calcium, when it is added to the soil. Oh, maybe you're asking if calcium nitrate added to the soil would have an effect on pH. Maybe that's what you're asking. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but unlikely. I have to go look at the literature on that, but it's unlikely that calcium nitrate would do that. The calcium would knock off some cations that are on the soil exchange sites, that's for sure. But the nitrate wouldn't bind with hydrogen and it wouldn't bind with aluminum. It would probably nitrify or be taken up by the plant, or I'm sorry, denitrify or be taken up by the plant. Gray Fox says that John Perry is in Idaho and claims to be big business. Oh, okay, yeah. Josiah says he's in Utah. Okay, Utah. So maybe he's in Utah. This is fine. I get some Calendly appointments from Utah as well. So, and Daily DIY Turf asked about my lawn. Yeah, I'll post a picture of my lawn on the community tab in the members only. Yeah. So Brody Dover. Yeah, that's a good sign that you have rust is when your lawnmower turns orange. He says he has fungus and drought. I'm in Canada, so I can't use any fungicide, but the lawnmower turning orange is getting annoying. Yeah, that's annoying. I'm not a pathologist, nor would I ever claim to be a pathologist. So I wouldn't know what recommendations are there to alleviate it's like rust or anything on your turf grass. I wouldn't know what that is, but I'm sure it exists. Maybe look at some of the extension agent bulletins. Remember, in the description of every video is a link to every United States turfgrass extension program, and you can find the one closest to you and explore their literature to see if they have any recommendations for any issues that you might be seeing. I'll be back at 9 p.m. tonight to go over how turfgrass is actually used to benefit our ecosystem by being a source to remove dairy waste. And when you have a lot of dairy waste, there's going to be a lot of issues that have to be taken care of, and turfgrass is actually used to help that problem. So I'll be back tonight to discuss that. Thanks so much, everybody. Talk to you tonight.